Lucky us, we are still talking about place value today, but it is different from the past few days. We are moving on from expanded form and expanded notation of decimals and talking about different ways to represent decimals. So our first learning target today is I can locate a specific point on a number line using decimals. Our second learning target today is I can use models to represent decimals. So let's take a look at a couple vocabulary terms and examples here. Our first one is a number line. It's just a line with numerical values placed in the correct order, showing the distance between numbers. If we refer to a point on a number line, we're just talking about an exact location or a specific number or location on that number line. And we've seen this one before, but let's talk about representing a number or an answer. When we say represent something in a different way, specifically with decimals, fractions, we can use different models or tools to show that, as seen here. One of these ways to represent decimals using models is with these grids. We have a hundreds grid on the right, and there is a tenths grid on the left. You'll notice both of these values look pretty similar, right? There is a 6 in the tenths place and also a 6 in the tenths place here. This one just happens to have a 0 after. 60 hundredths and 6 tenths are actually the same amount, right? Look at these two models. If they were stacked on top of each other and the same size, they would both have the same amount of area shaded in on both. We do know that a tenth is the same as 10 hundredths, one full vertical column here. So let's talk about decimals on a number line for a minute though. Number lines can be made to represent any number. The number line below, specifically, starts at 0, right there, and ends at 1 on the right. This means any point between that 0 and 1 is a decimal number, right? Decimals are part of 1 or less than 1. So any number here before we get to 1 is a decimal number. So there are 10 sections between 0 and 1 here. 10 sections, not 10 lines. If you count the dashes, the lines in between 0 and 1, you would get 9. You might end up picking the wrong decimal amount or wrong number if you count it that way. You've got to think of it as sections. If I start at 0 and I go to the first line, that's just one section. I'm at 0.1 or 1/10. So each of these 10 sections is worth a tenth, right? Because it takes 10 of them to make one whole. So that orange point below on this example here represents 0 decimal point 2 or 2 tenths. The orange bar I've added on there just shows the two sections that it is encompassing. So if I've got this point on the number line, I'm talking about the space between 0 and that point. So I've got 1, 2, right? I'm at 2 tenths because this number line goes from 0 to 1 and there are 10 sections and I'm representing 2 of them. Always count from 0 or the number on the left if it's not 0. Number lines won't always start at 0. Always count the sections and not the number of lines. So look at this new example below. Notice the starting and ending number, right? It's not 0 to 1 anymore. I have 30 to 31. So I'm still only going one whole number on this number line, but from a different starting number. So what whole number and decimal number represents the point on that number line? Because it's not just a decimal number, right? I'm starting at 30, so I have at least 30 whole numbers first. So let's start at 30. If I go to the first dash, that would be 30 and 1/10. Second one, 30 and 2/10, 30 and 3/10, 30 and 4/10, 30 and 5/10, 30 and 6/10. So because there are 10 sections between 30 and 31, I know that each section, again, is worth 1/10. So I know that the point on that line is 30 decimal point 6, or 30 and 6 tenths. Let's switch things up a little bit. Let's use models to represent decimal values. Sometimes you might need to represent a decimal using a model, or identify a decimal value represented by a model. Can you already write the values represented by the models below if you had not seen those numbers on screen? If you can, awesome. If not, let's talk about it. The model on the left is tenths, right? Those are full columns, so each one is a tenth. There are 10 of them making up one whole. There are 4 of them shaded in, so I'm showing or representing that I have 4 tenths. The model on the right is hundredths, right? There's 100 little squares. Now each column is still a tenth. There are 3 full columns shaded in. That's why there's a 3 in the tenths place. And there's 5 more in the next column. So now I've got 5 hundredths. Together, that is 35 hundredths. So keep in mind that hundredths are smaller than tenths. Sometimes you can represent decimal values on both a hundredths and tenths grid if the value is the same. So I have 6 tenths here. I've got 60 hundredths on the right. Those two numbers are actually the same. They represent the same amount. 1 tenth equals 10 hundredths. If I still have 6 columns on both of these models shaded in, it's the same amount, 6 tenths. But I could also say 60 hundredths. It's the same amount. You can also use more than one model. Remember, we're talking about decimals, which are part of one. So if we're looking at one model, we're probably talking about something less than 1, unless it's fully shaded in. In the example below, you can see that we have the number 2 and 38 hundredths represented. I've got 2 complete models, so that's my whole number of 2. Then I have my decimal point, and then on this last one, I've got 38 hundredths shaded in. So together, that is 2 and 38 hundredths.